Holy City Center Radio, it's episode 363, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Friday, April 18th, 2025. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show, or welcome if this is your first time. Happy to have you here and excited that it's Friday. If you need some weekend plans or really any plans in the future, go to holycitycenter.com/calendar. And if you're just looking for the latest news, whether it be food and bev, entertainment, things like concert announcements, just knock off the calendar part of that URL and head to the main homepage. You can find out everything that's going on in the Holy City. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but one little tiny, not really a life update, but I was playing around with ChatGPT the last couple days, just trying to see different things that it could do, how well it did certain things. And I was listening to a podcast where they had ChatGPT provide an overview of this podcast show, so they're like, oh, well, let's see what ChatGPT has to say about our podcast. And then asked it some questions like, what are some criticisms of the podcast? And, so on and so forth. So I decided to do a similar thing with Holy City Center as well as this podcast. And it was interesting. Some of it was accurate for sure. Based on when I asked, what is Holy City Center? It came up with some background information that was, about myself and the site that was absolutely accurate, which makes sense. I mean, it's combing, the internet. So it's going to pick up things like my website's bio and just assume everything in there is true. So, I mean, I could make up stuff and it might have popped up in there, but, it was fun seeing what they said were the compliments that the site gets as well as the criticisms. And it was just interesting and kind of fun to do that, just to play around with it. AI, I've been using ChatGPT for really just silly things. I haven't really used it for anything of substance, over the last year or so. And it has gotten better and it does things okay, but we're still a little ways away from the machines taking over, but not too far. But anyway, so I had some fun with that today. So, if you have a chance, it's free. Most of the stuff, you can just kind of see it for yourself, see what you think about it. But it was just kind of fun to see what it pulled from the internet when I asked, hey, what do people say about the website, or what is the general, feeling about it, or or is it mostly criticisms, and what are the criticisms? And so it's just a little fun little thing I did today. But anyway, let's get into the latest news. All right, we've got some updates for you. First one is about the liquor liability reform, or whatever you want to call it, that's been going on in the state capitol. You may remember there's essentially two dueling bills, for lack of a better term, one in the state Senate, one in the state House. The one in the state Senate focused on what's called tort reform, which is basically reform in all aspects of insurance liability. So not just, the food and bev industry, which has been a big issue for many people in the state, whether you work in that industry or not. We have learned how this has been harming businesses. But again, the state Senate version of the bill was talking about all sorts of liability as it related to insurance. You may remember I had an interview with a local attorney by the name of Gedney, Howe the Fourth. That was the 347th episode of this podcast, so not too long ago. The link to that interview is going to be in the show notes if you want to give it a listen. He provided so much background and information about that bill, which is S244. And some of the potential negative consequences from it. And he talked about how this tort reform could affect liability and payments as it relates to the medical field, and how that might actually harm people, that were to go in and maybe something negligent happened to them, and how they might not be compensated the way they should be. And, obviously there's been some changes since that episode a few weeks back, but it gives you a general idea of, hey, this isn't just about the whole food and bev issue of the liquor liability insurance, the premiums and the liability that, they all could face 100% liability, regardless of what their actual liability, however you could determine that, would be. But this is going to go into other industries as well. Meanwhile, the House bill was more focused on, not just more, it was only focused on liquor liability insurance. So it was, instead of bringing in all this other stuff, it was just going to have a very focused approach to the issue, which is what I think most people want in politics when possible. Don't add all this other stuff. This is the issue. Let's fix this issue. So there's a bit of it's both have essentially stalled out. One is dead, and of course it's the one that I thought was better in the sense of, hey, we're just going to focus on this one thing, and that's the House version. That is now dead, and no surprise, it took some shady, dumb political stuff to make that happen. So let's give you some more background here. All right, so first, back to the Senate version, talking about tort reform. The critics have said that the state's tort laws have created a legal environment in which defendants ranging, from everything from truck drivers to brain surgeons could be held could be held liable for all of the damages in personal injury cases, even if they were partially at fault. That's what I was kind of referencing with the liquor liability. If someone gets drunk, over however many hours one night, and they went to their first bar they had like a single beer and a water, and then they left, and then they went out and they had several beers at multiple bars after that. I mean, does that first bar, should they really be held 100% reliable for that person's actions? It seems like they shouldn't, right? And so the thought process for these folks were, hey, if we're going to do this whole liability thing as it relates to, food and bev businesses, let's look at really everything. So if a truck driver gets in an accident, even if they're not 100% at fault, they're saying, hey, that applies to them too. Same with like a brain surgeon. Should they be held 100% liable if they aren't, if other people made mistakes? Shouldn't you get where this is all going? And so on the surface, it sort of makes sense. But then again, I invite you to check out the interview with Gedney Howe, where at least that wording made it unclear. Okay, sure, you might fix that, but is it going to have unintended consequences for the people that were meant to get compensation when these things happen? And so that's the one that's had a lot of backing by the Republicans in the state, specifically the Senate Majority Leader Shane Massey. This is his legislation, so he's been really pushing it and really wanting it to go through. So what he ended up doing is just one of these stupid, completely political, of course, and you know how there's like procedures and things, not just on the state level, but also on the federal level when it comes to Congress and the House. There's these silly procedural things where bills or discussions or really anything can be killed, can be stopped, can be postponed just by a silly like procedural vote or maneuver that people do. And he basically did that. So despite the House bill, which was the one that was solely focused on the liquor liability insurance, it already passed the House unanimously, by the way. So bipartisan, unanimous, not just like bipartisan, like, oh, a couple people from one party joined on. The entire House said, yeah, we approve this. But it just never got brought up in the Senate. And the only person that could prevent that really is the Senate Majority Leader Shane Massey, and he prevented it from happening. But he went a step further and made it so that bill no longer even exists. So he had a closed-door meeting with other Senate Republicans back on April 15th, just a few days ago, and Senate lawmakers ended up approving a motion that just basically rewrote the House bill into an exact copy of the Senate's broader tort reform bill. So they had this thing that was unanimously passed by the House, very easily could have been brought up in the Senate, got passed, and boom, there's been some changes to liquor liability insurance, and they can still talk about their other bill if they want to. Instead, he didn't bring it up for debate, didn't bring it up for any kind of discussion. There's a closed-door meeting with just Senate Republicans, so none of the Democrats are involved in this. And they just basically take that bill and say, nah, let's just turn this into exactly what we want it to be, which is that broader tort reform. And so Massey said he did it to break a stalemate in negotiations, but really it's just he wanted to kill that bill so that his could go forward. And of course, his is the one where it's pretty unclear. Okay, yeah, this might help out, some of the people as far as, who maybe shouldn't be held liable in certain fields, 100% liable for certain things. I get that. That's fair. But it might end up harming other people, the people that these, insurance is supposed to help in these situations. So, just how could you, again, just political and a dumb procedure, really annoying that he did that. And so that's the end of it. The House version that was solely focused on the liquor liability insurance is dead. Now that bill is basically the exact same as the Senate version, which is this broader, look at tort reform. However, it doesn't mean it's necessarily going to pass, because there has certainly been some pushback to that bill. And although Massey may think, oh, we broke the stalemate because now we have identical bills and we're only working on these, this bill now, the one I want to pass, there's been enough pushback where it might not go through. And time is running out before, because how the legislative calendar is. It's not quite as long as you would think. You would think this would be a full-time job where they are constantly in session. That is not the case. So we'll see what ends up happening. But for now, the bill that, I supported over the Senate version, which is not to say the Senate one won't, couldn't potentially turn out to be good overall. But if you really wanted to fix the issue, and again, who knows, the House version, you never really know if these things are going to fix the problems that are happening. But that was the one that I had more confidence in, and a lot of people who share similar beliefs to me, felt the same way. So I'll keep you updated and see if that Senate version goes forward. Meanwhile, a bill that was aiming to dissolve Charleston County's constituent school boards has passed both sides of the chamber and now is heading to Governor Henry McMaster's desk, where indications seem to be he is going to sign off on this. So this happened this past week. The measure is going to end up, again, as long as Governor McMaster signs it, it would abolish the 8 constituent school boards that we have here in this area, and will transfer their duties to the Charleston County School Board. So there's the Charleston County School Board. That's the one we usually talk about the most. Those are the ones that, over the last few years have been some controversies as far as like searching for, hiring, firing superintendents, and making other policies involving the schools in Charleston County. The constituent school boards are a little different. They handle things like student transfer requests. They end up drawing attendance zones and handling certain disciplinary matters as well. And because there's 8 different boards, they, of course, represent different districts. And so they would only focus on whatever district they're in. These school board and these constituent school boards aren't anything new. This isn't something that came up over the last few years and people decided, they don't really work. They were first formed back in 1967 after state lawmakers voted to consolidate 8 individual districts into one centralized district with a 9-member board. Now, that model, it was unique to Charleston County in that no other district in the country operates under, something similar to that. But regardless, it's been around for a long, long time. And now, again, it's expected this will be done away. So what does that mean? Yes, the obvious is those issues are going to transfer to the Charleston County School Board instead of having these 8 district boards handling those issues. And is that really a big deal? It depends on who you ask, of course, right? So the Charleston County Superintendent, Anita Huggins, has said, that she supports this. There's obviously some things to still work out. As far as the details of how everything will go, but seems to be basically in favor of this. Whereas, of course, the constituent school board members are concerned, which makes sense. I mean, this is their role. The main concern that was talked about was having the school board members taking over the role in disciplinary hearings. So Katie Calloway, who is the chair of the District 3 Constituent Board for James Island, said this, quote, "My concern is a paid staff member is not going to have the same perspective, compassion, or understanding of family situation that folks in the community have. We're not paid staff people. We do this because we care and feel we have a responsibility to it," end quote. So that's the difference between the school boards, the county school board and these constituent district boards. And her assertion is we live in these communities, these districts. So it's, we're very, and obviously I'm paraphrasing from the quote I just read, but they're intimately aware of their district more so perhaps than the Charleston County School Board would be, because they oversee a much bigger area. With this kind of breakdown, they could handle things with a little bit more personable approach, understand the issues, understand the people involved, etc. So we'll see, what ends up happening, if there's any big changes, if this is going to lead to more controversies. The county school board has been relatively quiet after the last couple years where it seemed like there was constantly drama and issues with them. But in any event, the bill was unanimously passed in the House earlier this month. And obviously, as I mentioned, it passed in the state Senate, and now it goes to the governor, who, as I said, is expected to sign it, which means the changes would take effect on July 1st. School choice, another hot button issue here in South Carolina, is in the news. That's because lawmakers here in the Palmetto State have reached a compromise agreement on a revised plan that would use public dollars to fund private schools after the state Supreme Court threw out a similar plan early in the 2024-25 school year. So despite the Supreme Court here in the state throwing this out, they're trying again to find a way to use public dollars to help fund private schools. Some folks, basically critics of this plan, they fear it's still not enough to pass muster with a newly installed conservative majority on the court, describing the proposal as a rushed and, as a Post and Courier put it, quixotic effort to force an unconstitutional proposal into law in the final days of the 2025 legislative session. And it certainly seems that way, considering the original plan was deemed unconstitutional. And why is that? Well, the state constitution expressly prohibits public dollars from going to private or parochial schools, a limitation that conservatives, especially in this state, have long been against, and they see it as being biased towards lower income students seeking alternative to the state's public school system. So their side is basically saying, hey, if we don't allow people who are in, lower income situations, and you know how this works, lower income, whether it's towns, cities, counties, they don't have as much funds to be used for whatever in their school systems, and they tend to struggle. And so if there's a family that wants their kids to go to a different school that's better, but they can't afford it on their own, we should be able to help them out with that. That's their assertion and why they're trying to pass this, despite the fact it's against the state constitution. And, of course, there's reasons why people don't want their public funds going towards, being able to help fund private schools. The worry is, because this is kind of, and again, is it hyperbolic perhaps, or is it something that could happen? That by doing this, it's going to further weaken public schools in general, but also those lower income schools. It's going to make it even harder for them to survive and won't do as well, among several other concerns. So time is running out, like I said, in the legislative session. So we'll see what ends up happening here. But I just don't understand how they're trying to do this again when it's expressly against the state constitution, but it's never stopped them before. And lastly, some good news. The Charleston Police Department reported that there's been a reduction in crime throughout the city. This is according to a recently released annual report reflecting back on 2024. Of course, not every type of crime has gone down, but there's been some that did go down, not significantly so, but there are some positives to look at. So I'm going to run down some of the bigger numbers here, or the crimes that people seem to be most interested in as far as what it's like year over year. So Charleston police reported a 10.7% drop in overall crime compared to the 5-year average. So that's certainly good. 10% is nothing to sneeze at. Another good number here is that homicide rates fell by 47.4%, with 6 homicides recorded in 2024 compared to 10 in 2023. And again, this is specific to city of Charleston, just in case you missed that part. Other reductions in major crime categories included robberies being down 22.7%, sex offenses down 28.9%, burglaries down 21.5%, and motor vehicle thefts down 27.9%. So all those are pretty significant drops. That's certainly a good thing. But no, as I mentioned, not all types of crimes have decreased. For instance, aggravated assaults went up by 4.3%, and thefts from motor vehicles rose just a little bit, 0.7%. So obviously those two increases are smaller than the last few that I mentioned, where crime was falling, the much more significant percentages of crime falling, but of course never good, even if it's just a small percentage of crimes going up. But I'm glad to say that the ones I just said are much smaller percentages. In addition, the number of deadly car crashes decreased by 52%, and serious collisions were down 54%. The department says that those last two were attributed to increased traffic enforcement efforts. The department also reported that there was a 31% increase in impaired driving arrests, rising from 452 in 2023 to 592 in 2024. So that's, of all the increases, that's obviously the most significant one in terms of, the percentage amount. So, overall, pretty good news. That's, we definitely like to hear crime is down. We like hearing that it's down by a large percentage as well. So that's good. Obviously, some went up. That's not good. But thankfully, those percentages were a little bit smaller, except, of course, as I mentioned, the impaired driving, a 31% increase is a much higher amount, than the others, and certainly not something you like to see, although that could be, just more enforcement or, whatever. But regardless, you don't want to see a big increase like that. So overall, pretty good numbers. And that'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. Thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Sound System for producing this and every episode of Holy City Center Radio. Thank you to Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every show. If you have a moment and haven't already done so, whatever platform you're currently listening to this podcast on, just go ahead and, like the podcast, rate it, follow it, subscribe, review it, whatever you can do. All those things help out, unless, of course, you give it a bad review or rate it poorly. But if you like the show and rate it, in a nice way, that certainly would help out, and I would appreciate it. I hope you have an amazing weekend. I'm already looking forward to talking to you next week, though. But until then, good night. And good luck.